You know, if you accidentally touch a hot stove, your hand pulls back before you even consciously register the pain.
Right, yeah. Your nervous system doesn't exactly ask for your permission first.
Exactly. It just does its job. It physically yanks you away to protect you from tissue damage.
Because the human brain's threat detection system is just ruthlessly efficient. When it senses danger, survival and self-preservation immediately override any kind of higher-level thinking,
Yeah.
every single time.
But what is really wild to think about is, well, what if that exact same biological reflex, like that primal fight or flight mechanism, gets triggered not by a hot stove, but by a fraction?
Or an algebra equation written on a classroom whiteboard.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like an exaggeration, right? But neurobiologically, that is the exact reality for millions of people.
It really is. We are looking at an educational landscape where the brain fundamentally misinterprets a math problem as an actual physical threat to survival.
Which is just mind-blowing.
Oh.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We have a genuinely fascinating stack of educational research on the table today.
We do, yeah. It covers cognitive load theory, neurobiology, instructional design, a really comprehensive look at the issue.
And our mission today is to unpack this massive, nearly universal phenomenon. We want to know why so many incredibly capable people walk around with the deeply held belief, I'm just bad at math.
Right. Because we're going to explore how that label is rarely a reflection of someone's actual cognitive ability.
It's more of a shield, right?
Exactly. It's a psychological shield. It's this protective identity adopted to survive a flawed educational environment. So we're going to look at how it forms, why it triggers these really self-sabotaging behaviors, and crucially, how it can actually be rewired.
So I want to ask you listening right now, have you ever stared at a math problem and felt your brain instantly go completely blank?
Or maybe you've caught yourself in a restaurant, trying to calculate a tip, and you feel that little spike of panic.
Oh, totally. And you just pass the receipt to your friend and laugh like, oh, I'm not a numbers person.
Right, we hear that all the time.
So today, we're looking at why your brain does that and why it is actually just trying to protect you. To kick this off, the research points to a very specific turning point in a student's life.
Yes, the academic term they use for this is the ontological evolution of mathematical identity.
Whoa. Okay, pause. Ontological evolution. Let's translate that.
Right, it's a very heavy way of describing a student's self-concept regarding math. Mathematical identity is simply how much you see yourself as a quote-unquote math person.
Got it.
And we have to remember that learning anything inherently involves discomfort. Psychologists call it the zone of proximal discomfort.
That's that wobbly, frustrating sensation when you're trying to grasp a concept that's just slightly out of your current reach, right?
Exactly. Learning naturally involves temporary failure. But a dangerous shift happens when a student moves from experiencing a localized challenge, like, okay, this specific geometry task is hard, to internalizing a permanent, immutable trait.
Like, I am bad at this.
Yes. The localized struggle metastasizes into a global identity.
I was just thinking about how strange that is, because we don't do that with other skills at all. Think about learning to ice skate.
Oh, that's a great example.
If you strap on skates for the first time, step onto the ice, and immediately slip and fall flat on your back, you don't instantly assume you have a genetic inability to walk on frozen water.
Right. You don't declare yourself biologically incompatible with winter sports.
Exactly. You just think, wow, ice is incredibly slippery. I need to practice my balance. So why is math different? Why do we internalize the struggle so deeply and so quickly?
Well, to understand why it happens so specifically in math, we have to look closely at the crucible where this identity is forged, which is the traditional mathematics classroom.
Because this identity doesn't just form in a vacuum.
No, not at all. It forms through repeated experiences of confusion, cognitive overload, and public comparison. And cognitive overload is really the driving force here.
Which is all about working memory, right?
Yes. Human working memory is a severe bottleneck. It can only hold about 4 to 7 chunks of novel information at any given moment.
So think of your brain like a computer, and working memory is your RAM.
Right, exactly.
If you open a Word document, you're fine. But if you open a massive video editing software, and you also have, like, 40 browser tabs open, the internal fan starts screaming, the cursor freezes, and the whole system crashes.
That is the perfect way to look at it. In math, those browser tabs are foundational skills.
So if a student hasn't automated basic arithmetic...
Right, they still have to consciously use mental energy to calculate 7 times 8. That takes up massive space in their working memory.
And then the teacher introduces a multi-step algebraic equation on top of that.
Exactly. And the student's RAM is already full, so the brain literally crashes. It cannot process the algebra because the cognitive space is totally maxed out by the extraneous load of the basic math.
Now imagine that computer's crashing, but it's not sitting in your quiet home office. It's sitting on a desk in a room where 25 other people are watching it crash.
Which brings in the social aspect. The research talks heavily about status hierarchies in classrooms.
Yeah, classrooms inherently rank students, whether the teacher intends to or not.
A status order emerges very, very quickly.
I mean, we all remember it, right? You have the high-status students who answer rapidly. Their hands shoot up before the teacher even finishes the question.
And they are publicly deemed the smart ones.
Right. And then you have the lower-status students who are visibly struggling, kind of sinking lower into their chairs, just hoping they don't get called on while everyone else seems to effortlessly get it.
And the human brain is, above all else, a pattern recognition machine.
So it's taking all this in.
Exactly. After a student experiences this cognitive crash, this mental freeze, over and over again, while simultaneously experiencing the public humiliation of being at the bottom of the status hierarchy, the brain recognizes a pattern.
It solidifies the bad at math identity to make sense of all those repeated negative stimuli.
Yes, it categorically labels math as a danger zone. The brain is recognizing the threat of repeated social and intellectual failure.
Wow. And once that label is applied, the way a student interprets a bad grade fundamentally changes. The sources dig into something called causal attributions.
Right. Attribution theory explains how we justify what happens to us.
Okay, so how does that look for a student with a growth mindset?
A student operating with a growth mindset experiences a failure on a test and attributes it to a flawed strategy. They think, my studying method failed, or I didn't practice enough, I just need to try a different approach.
So the failure is separate from their self-worth.
Precisely. But a student who has solidified a fixed mathematical identity attributes that same failure to a stable, innate lack of ability.
They think, I failed because I lack the math gene. I'm fundamentally broken.
Exactly. And the physical grading structures in traditional classrooms actively reinforce that fixed mindset.
Oh, the grading. This was so interesting because in a traditional 15-week semester, you average a student's scores.
Right. Which means a mistake made in week 2, when they were literally just encountering a concept for the very first time, becomes a permanent anchor.
Dragging down their final grade all the way in week 15. The system is mechanically teaching the student that early failure is fatal and permanent.
Which, naturally, cultivates a profound sense of hopelessness.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second, though.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, isn't a bad grade in week 2 just objective data? If you don't know the material, you earn a low score. How else are we supposed to measure if a student is actually learning?
Well, that is the traditional argument, but we have to ask what the purpose of assessment actually is. Is it to document speed, or is it to document learning?
Okay, fair point.
The research contrasts traditional averaging with what's called standards-based grading. In a standards-based system, only the final mastery counts.
Meaning those early mistakes are treated differently?
Exactly. It treats those early week 2 mistakes purely as formative feedback to guide the next step of teaching. It does not treat them as permanent indictments of students' character or intelligence.
So if a student struggles for 10 weeks but finally masters the algebra concept in week 14, they get full credit.
Because they learned it.
That makes total sense. If the system tells you that your early failure is permanent and it's going to haunt your GPA forever, you really have no choice but to protect yourself.
And that brings us to the next massive takeaway from the research. The bad at math label isn't a confession of stupidity.
It's a brilliant, highly effective self-preservation strategy.
Exactly. By preemptively declaring incompetence, the student alters the social contract of the classroom. They immediately lower the expectations of their teachers, their parents, and their peers.
Because if everyone knows you are the kid who is bad at math, no one expects you to succeed.
Right. And more importantly, it lowers the emotional cost of trying and failing.
Oh, this is so true. Think about the vulnerability required to try your hardest. If you put your whole heart into a math problem, if you study for hours and you still fail.
That is devastating. It's a direct hit to your ego.
But if you proudly declare, I am terrible at this, and you don't even lift your pencil, failing doesn't sting, your ego wasn't invested at all.
You engineered the failure so it doesn't reflect your true potential.
I mean, we all do this as adults. Think about a time you preemptively made a joke about being terrible at bowling or karaoke or cooking.
Oh, absolutely.
You just do it so your friends won't judge you when you inevitably throw a gutter ball or bring the dinner. It's a way of saying, I know I'm bad at this, so you can't make fun of me for it.
It's a universal human defense mechanism. And in the classroom, this internal protective shield dictates all those frustrating external behaviors that adults constantly mislabel.
They call it laziness or defiance.
Exactly. But it's not. And I want to bring in researcher Peter Liljadal's work here because his research categorizes these behaviors perfectly.
Yes, he developed a taxonomy of what he calls studenting behaviors.
Right. Studenting behaviors are actions a student takes that look like learning, or at least look like being in school, but are specifically designed to avoid the discomfort of thinking.
And he outlines 4 main categories.
Yes. The first is slacking, which is the most obvious. It's an overt, visible refusal to engage with the task at all.
Okay, so if they aren't just being lazy, what are they actually doing when they ask to go to the bathroom for the 4th time during fractions?
Well, that's the second behavior, stalling. It's a delay tactic, asking for a hall pass, taking 5 minutes to search for a specific pencil, chatting with a neighbor.
So it's basically the biological flight response in action.
Exactly. The brain is trying to physically escape the threat.
The third one is my favorite, or at least the most recognizable to me from when I was in school, faking.
Oh, yes. Faking is incredibly common.
This is the student sitting up straight, staring intently at a textbook or a worksheet, looking highly academic while doing 0 actual cognitive work.
So they're just trying to blend into the furniture so the teacher doesn't call on them.
And finally, we have mimicking.
Right. This is where a student rote copies the exact steps the teacher took on the board. They copy the numbers, they copy the symbols, but they have absolutely no understanding of the underlying mathematical logic.
They're essentially just drawing shapes that happen to look like math.
Exactly. And these behaviors thrive because of the architecture of traditional classrooms.
Because of the desks?
Right. The anonymity of sitting quietly at rows of desks with private notebooks means no one can see that a student is faking or mimicking until the test happens.
And we really have to recognize that these are neurobiological shutdowns.
They are. When a student's frustration tolerance is breached by cognitive overload, the brain's amygdala essentially hijacks the system.
The amygdala being the threat processing center.
Yes. It triggers a freeze or flight response.
Yeah.
The student isn't consciously deciding to be defiant. They are in neurological distress.
And these protective behaviors go into absolute overdrive during a very specific developmental window, which is middle school.
Oh, middle school. The transition to early adolescence brings a massive, messy layering of social complexity onto an already difficult academic subject.
Yeah, the research calls it the thickening of social identities.
Right. In elementary school, the primary motivation for most children is pleasing adults, parents, and teachers.
But by middle school, that motivation shifts dramatically toward peer socialization. Peer perception and social status become the ultimate currency.
The stakes are suddenly life or death, socially speaking. And this really intensifies when you look at the research on stereotype threat and gender norms.
Especially for adolescent boys.
Exactly. For young boys, the hegemonic norms of stoicism and toughness completely clash with what it takes to learn math.
Because admitting you're stuck on a problem requires vulnerability. It requires raising your hand in front of everyone and saying, I don't understand.
Which, for a 13-year-old boy trying to project toughness, feels like a public admission of weakness. Attempting a problem and failing in front of peers is viewed as a massive social risk.
So the protective bad at math identity provides a socially acceptable out.
It's much cooler to say, I don't care about this stupid worksheet, than to say, I am trying my hardest and I don't get it.
The irony is brutal. The exact time in a student's life when math gets abstract, when letters get introduced into equations, requiring the absolute most vulnerability and mistake-making.
Is the exact age when kids are biologically wired to refuse to look foolish in front of their friends?
It creates a perfect storm. And once this identity locks in during adolescence, it forms a closed neurobiological loop that just feeds on itself.
Yes, let's trace that loop because it's so insidious. It starts with identity, which dictates behavior, which produces an outcome, which reinforces the identity.
And sitting right at the center of this loop is confirmation bias.
Exactly. The bad at math identity acts as a literal filter on reality. If a student with this fixed identity actually manages to succeed, say they guess well and get a B on a quiz, they don't update their self-concept.
They don't think, oh, maybe I'm getting better.
No, they attribute it to external factors.
Yeah.
They tell themselves the test was just easy or the teacher graded on a curve.
But if they fail,
The confirmation bias highlights it in neon. It instantly confirms their identity.
see, I knew I was bad at this. I shouldn't have even tried.
And this identity breeds intense math anxiety, which brings us back to the brain's hardware. Anxiety completely co-opts the working memory we talked about earlier.
Right. Instead of holding the rules for the math problem, the RAM is filled with intrusive, racing thoughts.
Thoughts like, I'm going to fail, time is running out, everyone is looking at me, I'm stupid. And with the working memory depleted by panic, cognitive performance naturally plummets. But the real tragedy is what happens physically in the brain.
Yeah, the research notes that high anxiety prevents the brain from accessing the prefrontal cortex.
It is the center of logic, reasoning, and problem solving.
So it's not a metaphor. If your prefrontal cortex is blocked, you literally physically cannot show what you know.
Exactly. Your palms are sweating, your heart is racing, you have tunnel vision on the paper.
So the failing grade on the test isn't actually a reflection of the student's math knowledge. It's really just a measurement of their anxiety.
But the student interprets that F as absolute proof that they are broken, and the loop tightens even further.
Wow. Breaking a neurobiological loop this strong requires far more than just a pep talk.
You cannot pep talk a student out of a survival reflex. It just doesn't work.
And this leads to the key insight from the instructional design research. Students don't need more motivation. They need entirely near physical and social experiences that actively contradict their established identity.
And step one is stopping what researchers call comfort-oriented feedback.
Okay, explain comfort-oriented feedback, because I think we all do this without realizing it.
We do. It's when a well-meaning teacher or parent sees a kid struggling, puts a hand on their shoulder and says, "It's okay, honey. Not everyone is a math person. You're great at art."
We think we're being so kind when we do that. We think we're relieving their stress and lowering the pressure.
But it's toxic kindness. Comfort-oriented feedback entirely validates the fixed identity. It tells the student, your suspicion is correct. You do not have the innate capacity for this, so you have my permission to stop trying.
That is heartbreaking. So to actually break the cycle, the physical environment of the room has to experience a structural disruption.
Yes. And the research highlights two specific structural practices from the Building Thinking Classrooms framework that disrupt this perfectly.
The first one is visibly random grouping.
Right. In a standard classroom, teachers often strategically group students by ability, which just reinforces those smart and weak roles we talked about.
But visibly random grouping means groups of 3 are randomized every single day right in front of the students using playing cards or a digital generator.
Yes.
How does drawing a playing card actually fix the status issue, though?
It disrupts the brain's pattern recognition. Because the grouping is random and constantly changing, the social hierarchy cannot crystallize.
Oh, I see.
No one is permanently locked into the role of the smart one who does all the work or the weak one who just watches. The status order is shattered every morning.
That is brilliant. And the second practice pairs those random groups with what researchers call vertical non-permanent surfaces.
Yes, which basically means having the students stand up and work together on large whiteboards or glass windows around the perimeter of the room.
Which totally removes the anonymity of sitting quietly at a desk.
It does. But the mechanisms of why this works are crucial. Standing up physically forces blood flow and interrupts the slouched, passive freeze response that students adopt at their desks.
They're physically engaged.
And because they are using dry erase markers, the mistakes are non-permanent.
The fear of the permanent pen mark is gone.
Precisely. The psychological risk of failure plummets when a mistake can be erased with the casual swipe of a hand.
It fundamentally lowers the emotional cost of trying, which, as we established earlier, is the entire reason the protective identity formed in the first place.
You literally cannot fake or stall when you are standing at a whiteboard with 2 peers and 1 marker. You are forced into the process.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway about how a student's mathematical identity is actually rewritten over time.
Identity changes through mastery experiences. It does not change through verbal encouragement alone.
It's about repeated success in the process of thinking, not just rushing to get the right answer, but engaging in productive struggle.
Right. Productive struggle is the sweet spot of learning. It is deliberate, low-stakes grappling with concepts.
The task is just hard enough to build new neural pathways, but scaffolded enough that it doesn't trigger that amygdala shutdown.
Exactly. And there's a brilliant concept in the research called rough draft math.
I love this idea. It's treating math the same way we treat writing an essay.
Yes. Your first attempt isn't supposed to be perfect, it's just a rough draft. It is supposed to be messy, incomplete, and full of crossed-out ideas.
And by celebrating the messy, incomplete thinking, students begin to reassociate math with exploration and creativity.
Rather than viewing it as a high-stakes performance where you are either correct or you are worthless.
It's amazing. We often get the relationship between confidence and success totally backward. We think a student needs confidence before they can succeed.
But confidence is an output, not an input.
Yes. Repeated, scaffolded success, even tiny successes, in the process of reasoning out a rough draft is what produces confidence.
When a student physically experiences that they can survive the confusion, the bad at math shield becomes unnecessary, and they simply begin to drop it.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? It means that learning is supposed to feel a little uncomfortable. When your brain feels like it is stretching, when you are frustrated by a problem, that isn't a sign that you lack ability or that you are fundamentally broken.
Not at all. That frustration is the literal biological sensation of your brain growing new neural connections.
It has been a genuinely fascinating journey through the cognitive and emotional architecture of how we learn and really how we protect ourselves when we feel like we can't.
It really has. The structural shifts make all the difference.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today. If the bad at math label is just a protective illusion, a psychological shield built by your brain to survive a flawed, high-stakes environment, what other fixed identities or limitations have you assigned to yourself?
That's a great question.
Maybe in your career, your hobbies, or your relationships. What if you aren't actually bad at public speaking, or bad at learning foreign languages, or bad at handling confrontation? And what might happen if you treated your next mistake in those areas not as a final failing grade on your character, but just as a rough draft? Just like that hand pulling back from the hot stove, your brain has been trying to protect you. But maybe, just maybe, it is time to turn off the alarm.